Today on Aabitoose, Winona LaDuke visits with White Earth Enrolled member and attorney Frank Bibeau about the proposed White Earth Constitution.
Talking to Frank Bibeau here, an attorney, and we are about to vote on a new tribal constitution. And how are you feeling about that? And you're a White Earth tribal member.
Yep.
Who is raised in, or just lives over to Leech Lake. You kind of jumped reses there, but you are a White Earth tribal member.
Yeah, and before we even, and this will play in later, I don't know that I'm a White Earth member by any other result other than trying to make us all relocate to White Earth. All of the Bibeaus live in Ball Club. I believe what I'm actually is what they call a Leech Lake pillager removed. It's kind of a weird concept, and so when they were trying to get everybody removed over here, I ended up becoming a White Earther, and apparently it has something to do with showing up and maybe somebody getting an allotment or something and then selling it and leaving, because my grandfather, out of like 10 kids, is the only one who's a White Earth enrollee, and supposedly he's the one that came here with his mother, at the turn of the century, and somehow everybody else is Leech Lake and we're all White Earth.
So you don't like us or what?
No, I'm just saying all the Bibeaus, and I think and the weird part is White Oak is where Ball Club is, and so White Oak is the compensation for the land that they took supposedly from Sandy Lake, and so in a technical sense, it may be that I'm even Pillager, White Oak, tied to Sandy Lake. So I don't like to limit myself just to what they've enrolled me to by name on paper as White Earth.
Okay. So, to start with, not even to start with, but, part of what you're pointing out is that we are voting that the largest band membership in the Minnesota Chippewa tribe is White Earth. But we all come from the bigger Anishinaabe. And some of us are here, and yet we are, I've followed this discussion, and there's no easy answer. We have a constitution, the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe, White Earth Tribal Constitutions, created under the Indian Reorganization Act, right?
Yep. And
those were not created for the benefit of longevity of tribal sovereignty or tribal self-determination.
Right.
Let's just be honest about it, right?
It's a capitalist model.
Right. And so we have a flawed system. But we're kind of doing our best to grapple with that. And plus, we don't need to go into all the historic trauma and everything, but we're having some. So here we are, 2013, in 2 months, our tribe is going to vote on the Constitution, and there is a lot of controversy around the Constitution.
Yep. I guess I would say a couple things, and my short answer would be I think it's a hoax. And the reason I say that is because we're part of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe at this point in time, and I don't understand how we can break away from the Minnesota Chippewa tribe with lineal descent when we're already enrolled under a constitution that provides for 25% 1/4 blood quantum. And I know that's an issue for some people who think that blood quantum is a minimum that should be, held up. For other people, including myself, we have family members who are already not able to be enrolled because their blood quantum has dropped below the 25%. And in the normal world of the Anishinaabe, if you lived in our community, we wouldn't even ask you what your blood quantum was. We would know who your parents are, who your cousins are, and we would just see you as another tribal member, and so it wouldn't even be an issue. And so, those are part of the issues that are trying to be fixed, and that's the biggest part that I don't think can be fixed by this Constitution. I've had a couple of my little cousins over in Ball Club, tell me about this. They see it on the internet, and they say, hey, we're going to be enrolled pretty soon. And I said, okay. And they think that means that they will be able to hunt on Leech Lake. I don't know that they will be able to hunt on Leech Lake with whatever enrollment or whatever White Earth is doing. Typically, under our Constitution, we would have to have a referendum to get rid of the Constitution or amend the Constitution, and that would involve all of the members of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. And one of the reasons I think
this is for a White Earth Constitution, all members of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe would have to vote.
Well, for White Earth to break away from the Minnesota Chippewa tribe and have its own constitution with its own blood quantum, and be able to enroll people, that's what it would mean. It would be meaning breaking away. And I don't think you can just secede, because if you could, I think Mille Lacs would have done it years ago, because they've frozen their enrollment. They won't even let other MCT members transfer in, even if they've got members who are enrolled at MCT or brothers and sisters are enrolled at MCT. Other people can't get enrolled. And so you've got these ad hoc mechanisms where people are trying to prevent people for transferring their enrollment so they can get to per caps and things like that. So if Mille Lacs, who's the wealthiest band with all of their attorneys and money, can't figure out how to secede, then I don't think White Earth can do it. And the next question...
So is this constitution a secession?
Well, it doesn't say it's part of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, and it doesn't even address the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, and I don't know what they're going to do about our Minnesota Chippewa tribal enrollment. And and then you have to go back to concepts like the Nelson Act. I mean, when you think about our enrollment and you look at like Grand Portage up there at the Arrowhead, up there at the tip, if they have, a couple thousand, 3,000 members, what happens when they run out of blood quantum Indians? Does the United States or Minnesota get that territory? Or if we got a bunch of White Earthers who are part of the MCT, can we go up there and continue to be tribal members and have a government and have a reservation? I don't think the people at White Earth are told what they might be giving up if this is a secession from the MCT.
Okay, so let me just ask you a couple of dumb questions.
Sure.
Okay, so first of all, one of the most controversial issues is blood quantum. And, that is controversial. It's very, to the heart of being Native. And I agree that traditionally our people who, if we live there and we know who they are, that's our community. And so in doing this, White Earth are you suggesting that White Earth then limits blood from elsewhere?
No, it's just the opposite in a sense. I mean, they're talking about lineal descent, and that's what we actually had before the revised Constitution in 1964, was everybody who could point to a member on the rolls could be enrolled.
We had that till 64?
Yeah.
And then in 64 is when they changed it to blood quantum.
Well, they changed a couple things. And that's when things started getting goofed up. In 64, they went to the 25% blood quantum, and I think that's...
Which is like the federal thing. The BIA is big on the 25%.
Exactly, because they want us to essentially whittle ourselves out of existence by not having any more enrolled members, and then they can come in and...
Not marry your cousins.
Right.
Right. Some of these tribes, that's what it is, right?
Right. There are tribes out in California that they talk about having 5 members and having a casino. So what does that mean for law enforcement purposes, or hunting and fishing and gathering? I mean, are we out in a parking lot or what? But they still have all those same rights that we would have with many members and many other resources, and that's where it gets tricky for me, is I don't understand if we're walking away from something, and if we're not, how can this Constitution supersede the MCT Constitution? And if half the members of the that are living on reservations of the MCT are White Earth, they say that half the enrolled members of White Earth members live on the MCT reservations. Leech Lake would be the second largest White Earth population out of the 6 reservations. What does that mean for us over there as White Earthers? Do I not get the rights of being an MCT member anymore? And then are those rights effective?
So that's not explicit.
No.
And so this is one of your flags. You're an attorney.
Right.
Flag for concern, not explicit what you relinquish in this Constitution.
That's right.
I got you.
That's right. And so I have to wonder about those kinds of rights, because our rights are held in common. When we were talking about the stuff for the 1855, if the Mississippi are essentially signatories to most of the 44 treaties, and we have some form of rights in most of them, are we just saying we just want to be the White Earth Reservation over here on the edge and break away from all of that? How are we going to integrate?
The treaties,
Right. Or even the MCT in that sense. I don't understand.
But the MCT is like, it's an anomaly. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It's like the super tribal government, right?
It's close to an anomaly. My understanding is that there's three in existence in the United States where they've combined multiple bands or reservations.
This isn't like the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, because they're all on one reservation.
Right. We just have multiple parcels. Otherwise, it would be. That's the thing. It would be like that. And so in a technical sense, those people, it's almost like the 3 affiliated tribes or something. They could technically have their own tribal government for their own group of people, but if you've only got 25 people, are you eligible for all the federal programs, where maybe the large group is what's really eligible, or if you all band together and identify yourself as 1,000 people, then you're eligible for other things. And can you run 4 or 5 governments at one time on the same territory, or is it just economically not feasible? So you end up with those kinds of ideas too. My other questions are, if White Earth can so easily write a constitution and change who their members are through lineal descent or whatever other mechanism you want to talk about, then why can't the people who were made to become White Earth members through the relocation efforts, and I'm speaking primarily about Sandy Lakers.
So say Sandy Lake.
Right. Why can't they just say, well, then we're also going to form our own constitution, and we're going to take our territory over at Sandy Lake, which, there's still a trust parcel over there, I think, and some other things, and why can't they just break away from the MCT too? Because they've been trying.
I mean, to me, part of what is interesting about this is we do need to make change.
Yep.
Now, the question of what the change is, who gets to be part of the discussion, who gets to be at the table, and where we're going are all, really important elements. But, I think that you and I will agree, as occasionally we do, that we need to make some changes.
Yeah.
Right? So really, White Earth is doing something that probably should be done. You're saying, someone needs to make a change. Yep. How else is a change going to happen? Who's going to change these constitutions? Who's going to make sure Sandy Lake has, is recognized as their own nation or, as their own tribal government? Who's going to do that?
The people. But the people have to understand what their rights and powers are, and no one wants to let them do that, because in the third world, the way you stay in power is to keep people poor, divided, and ignorant. And we have that everywhere on our reservations, and people are confused about our rights. And so it's not going to happen. What I tell people, and at first it hits people kind of in an odd way, and it catches them off guard and they don't like it, but as they think about it, it makes more sense to them. I believe under the Constitution that what we would have to do is have a referendum. And I think the referendum should have 2 questions. Do we go forward as one Minnesota Chippewa tribe, as we have been, as one large group, or are we going to go in 6 different directions? And let's say that's what we're going to do. Quit goofing around with what I consider a hokey constitution that can't break away a blood quantum from an existing constitution. So what I would argue is you have a referendum on what we're going to do. And if we're all going to go in one direction, then we need to act like one tribe. And if we're going to have one tribe, then I think we need to have something like a constitutional convention. And what I've suggested as another form of a referendum is to basically remove the governing article of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe constitution, which would take out all 30 RBC members at one time. And then as you're trying to figure out how to reform your government, you do an inventory of all the collective assets and natural resources on all 6 reservations, and then you figure out as a tribe, which coincidentally 50% of the voting members are White Earth, what you do with all the riches of the entire Minnesota Chippewa tribe, instead of letting the MCT basically be run by the 4 smallest reservations and enjoy the best living standards and stuff, while the 3/4 of the population at Leech Lake and White Earth are really still in poverty and have some great resources that nobody's even helping us utilize in a better fashion, whether it's the 1855 efforts that we're doing or anything else. And I think if we put ourselves all into one boat, if that's what we want, then we should we should work collectively.
Okay, so I got to go back over what you just said, because that was a lot of complex stuff. So first of all, you said something which was shocking, which was all the political representatives of all the tribes are gone.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, because one of the things under this Constitution I notice is that they're providing for a different representation system, but it's not clear how you get from here to there.
Because they're going to try to have the same people, because they don't want to give up their political seats to do this transition, because they still want to hold their positions. In a true change of a Constitution, you would have to have another election. You would set up a temporary government. If you look back,
government, like in some country we're looking at now.
That's what the MCT did back in the 30s. They had
so you would, if you really wanted. So your suggestion, okay. So back to this. Your suggestion is that you have an overall referendum
Yep.
of all MCT members, you do probably a lot of education and outreach so people know what they're voting on, because it is significant. These are not, this is significant issues. It's not just for us, it's for our descendants.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, this is huge. Okay, and we all agree that we're not in a bind. We're just in like some, I always call it white man's paper. We're in like some stuff that like we should probably not be in the 25% blood quantum and the all things approved by the Secretary of Interior and,
right.
reservation, whatever. Okay, so we say, and you would give people two choices. One, do you want to continue forward as the MCT? Or two, do you want to go into separate nations or separate bands, separate First Nations? That's the first question.
I think so.
Okay. So then let's say we have that question. Then you say if in either case a subsequent discussion would be had, because there are representation problems. White Earth has far too few, in my personal opinion. You have 3 districts and a secretary treasurer and a chair. You have 25,000 people, and over half of them, or 2/3, live in the cities. So, and some of those districts are pretty darn big. It doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. These are busy people.
Right.
So then would you suggest to go back and there's different facets of the Constitution. One is membership, right? Who gets to be an Indian? Or if there's 2 tiers of membership, like descendancy and 25% or more, right?
Right.
Then there's like who's your representatives. Then there's like how government is regulated. If you have a legislative and an executive, a regulatory branch, right?
Yep.
All that is part of this discussion we're having now, right?
Should be.
It is, but it's only for one tribe, right?
Well, it's only for one reservation. And that's the weird part. It's for the reservation. It's for the people that are enrolled on this reservation. And I don't think you can just narrow it down to that. I don't understand how you can do this separate and apart without breaking away from the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. It doesn't make sense that the feds, supposedly there's been conversation with the Department of Interior and things like that. I'm not aware of any mechanism to take a group of people and re-recognize them in a different place, because Sandy Lake would have done it already, because they've had all kinds of litigation on being recognized, and they're signatories to 10 treaties. And it's only the IRA creation that actually has squeezed them out of participation. Because if you have that referendum, and you got to think about these two paths.
Are you suggesting that Sandy Lake is squeezed out by the Minnesota Chippewa tribe?
Well, when you read a lot about the Burrs report and how the MCT came to be founded, there were meetings at East Lake and things like that, but there was never any contemplation about making Sandy Lake a regular reservation or anything. And that's because everybody was dispersed from there, probably. The larger voting districts were White Earth, Leech Lake, the cities, and the few people that lived there probably didn't make enough sense, because for a long time...
But it's so historic to us.
Well, it's even past historic. I think the cultural and maybe even traditional religious significance is so incredible that people, we need to educate ourselves on a lot of things so we understand the importance of all of those things. But I guess my point would be is if we decided to be one tribe and we were, say, in a year of constitutional reform and doing the inventory of our collective assets and so forth, we wouldn't be limited to having just the 6 reservation governments again. We could create 10 reservation governments. You could have Sandy Lake be its own place, just like White Earth or Leech Lake is now. You go to Mille Lacs, you've got a couple.
East Lake too, right?
East Lake too, right? I mean,
it's another one that has legitimate,
Well, right, and so you look at like Boys Fort. You've got the 2 parcels up there, so they could be their own reservations. It might be right. It might be to our advantage to have 10 or 12 reservations under something like an MCT, or continue to call it an MCT, and then maybe we want to change what our representation looks like. Instead of having those 3 members on one reservation that you're talking about, there may be some other mechanism we want to use. But when I think about this, if you're going to try to construct this, I would almost want to do those parts first, and then try to create the triangle, or whatever you want to call it, of the legislative and the executive and the judiciary, where you create the judiciary first and have elected judges so that when people are trying to create other criminal mechanisms or other legal mechanisms or powers for the executive or legislative body, you have a neutral elected judicial branch to bring it to that isn't appointed by the RBC to make those decisions. Because unfortunately, RBCs can pass a resolution at night when 3 out of 5 people are there and you don't even know it till the next day.
Right. And so, just to kind of reiterate for those listening, I'm talking to Frank Bibeau, this is Winona LaDuke, our show Aabitoose. And in that, you're saying, I'm kind of hearing saying, good idea to make change, not the right plan.
Not the right plan. The last thing I would say about this plan that bothers me the most...
We're talking about the Constitution.
The new Constitution proposed by White Earth is it will take 2/3 or 60% or whatever to amend or change the Constitution. That is a number that will never happen because we've never amended or changed our Constitution since 1964 in any meaningful ways. There's been a couple of attempts, and even those I think are scandalous, but it's very hard to do as the people. So if the people are going to try to overcome 60%, we generally don't have that kind of a turnout even.
So, I am not even familiar what percentage is required to change the Constitution now.
Well, yeah, I think you have to collect 20% signatures to get a referendum vote, and you have to have 30% show up. And under the existing rules, you have to basically post the eligible voter list 30 days before the election. And that's one of the protection mechanisms, because if you don't have 30% show up to even vote, then the item doesn't even have a chance to pass or fail. It's just null.
Okay, so people are listening to this. We're making a leap of faith because people actually, I mean, there is a lot of discussion. Some people are knowledgeable. Some people are not knowledgeable, but this is a very big issue coming up in November, right? And so, some people are going to vote for it. Why are they going to vote for it? Because they want change.
Well, I think it's a very unfortunate thing, but we have so many grandchildren who are being, squeezed out one way or another and not being included or not eligible to participate. And we see each other as family members and essentially as equals to some degree, and we can't be.
So this Constitution enfranchises descendants.
Yes.
It makes descendants members in some exact form, or it's not clear.
Not clear enough to me. It looks like they make them the same level member as the existing members.
Okay, so that is what this Constitution does, which is one major reason why people would support it, because our tribal membership, and even in my own family, my children are enrollable or are enrolled at different tribes, but they were raised on this reservation, and I am not unique in that situation. And then what about those Canadian Indians? My kids are Canadian. Right. But so this is one of the reasons that people will vote for it. But this is only one facet of what is a very complex document that has many more legal implications, is what you're saying to me.
Right. And I'm afraid we could be losing more than we would be gaining.
And so that is why people would vote for it, is that they want change. Why people would vote against it would be, one, because it removes White Earth from the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, although we're over 50%, right?
Right.
Two, because why would they not vote for it?
Well, I think there are people who, for whatever reason, believe that to be Indian, you actually have to be more than 25% blood quantum, or you're really not enough Indian, I mean, whether it's people who perceive that you can pass as non-Indian or whatever those things are, or you haven't endured the hard road of racism and poverty by not appearing to be an Indian in other circumstances.
Not enough bologna steak and racism?
Well, there are people who have put up with some very hard times here, who've lived on the reservation for a long time. And, unfortunately, that's the part that I was talking about with staying in power in the third world, of keeping people poor, divided, and ignorant. That's the divided part. We get confused about dividing ourselves when we should be working together and working on the issues that are important to us. And instead we get caught up in why you can't participate, you don't have a right, you're not Indian enough, or whatever else. And then we all get pissed off and go home, and there's nobody left to even work on the issue that we all came to fix.
Right, and I always like to point out that some of our most renowned Ojibwe language scholars are not enrolled in this training.
Right.
That's a perfect example.
Right.
We have some brilliant people and some really remarkable people who are not enrolled.
Right.
And so it is a lot of scrapping, I mean, let's just be honest, it's a lot of scrapping over things, and we have some really amazing people. Okay, so another concern that people have, aside from the removal of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, that you're actually kind of saying that might not actually be, are you saying it may not be legal?
I don't think it's legal. That's why I use the word hoax. I don't think they can use that Constitution for federal recognition. I don't think they can use that Constitution to get any other particular federal rights. And I think they could be even, like I said, jeopardizing rights that we may not want to relinquish. We don't know what we were giving up if this were even possible. And if it is possible, then why can't people like Sandy Lake, Sandy Lake, East Lake, Rice Lake, whatever, break away as well in this process? Because I know that those people would like to have their own place and do their own thing, and they still remember where they belong. So what's the difference?
Right. Okay, so, with all those other land holdings held by the Minnesota Chippewa tribe on White Earth, what does that mean? Because Minnesota Chippewa tribe has a lot of land on White Earth.
Exactly. There's two issues with that. That's interesting that you brought that up. One of the issues with that is, take the other half of the scenario I was talking about with a referendum, if you go in one way or six ways. So as a White Earther living on Leech Lake Reservation, right now, I don't even have the right to get a netting permit because Leech Lake says they're only for Leech Lake members. So what happens if I become suddenly disenfranchised from the whole tribe, and instead now I'm living on a adverse reservation where I don't have any rights anymore because it's all supposedly Leech Lake enrollees, and I'm a White Earther? Do I have no rights at all
anymore? So you can't go hang out in your little postage stamp of MCT land.
But I live on MCT land, so I know that they can't really take that away. And the next question becomes, what about the MCT land? Because one of the other quirks that's left that I think is holding the MCT together is that there's I don't know, I'll say a number, I'll say 100,000 acres. I think it's 60,000 acres of land that are on the 6 different reservations, and they don't know how to resolve it. And so people like Karen Diver say things like, well, we need to do an inventory so we know how much is on each reservation, so we know what we might be giving up or gaining. And other people say, well, why do you need to know that? And that would be Irma. And because I think there's 60,000 acres of MCT land on White Earth. And so essentially the MCT is trying to suggest that White Earth should have to pay to get that land transferred from the MCT to White Earth. Now, what's the point of that, and why should we even be looking at buying land a second time through a federally created, corporation under the Indian Reorganization Act? And why would we have to buy land from them to make it White Earth when it's already held in trust for the descendant treaty bands? But yet that's where they're at. And that's why I say they're keeping us poor, divided, and ignorant. They don't even want to let us know the real stuff. The thing that baffles me, and this goes back to 72 and some of this, what I would call internal apartheid, being a White Earth person living on Leech Lake or however it works out.
Sounds like you had counseling, Frank.
Well, in 72, they passed the 2 amendments. One was to make it go from age 21 to 18 to vote, and the other one was to make it so that you could only vote for representation on the reservation of enrollment. Okay? Now, how do you disenfranchise people from their right where they are presently to vote in the Minnesota Chippewa tribe? Because until 1972, White Earthers held offices on multiple reservations, Mille Lacs and Fond du Lac and other places.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Well, right. So how do you disenfranchise part of your own tribe?
Okay, Frank, this is a really incredible question. I'm going to take a quick station break ID, and we're going to get right back. Frank Bibeau asking the question of how do you disenfranchise your members of your own tribe on your reservation.
KKWE, Niji Radio.
Don't you blame me for your problem. I'm not your Indian anymore. You belong to white man. When you can't change me, don't you try. We don't want your white man rule no more. We can live our own way. When
KKWE, Niji Radio.
Back with Frank Bibeau. Now, I feel like I opened a can of worms or a can of whoop butt or something here when I asked Frank about the Constitution. I mean, but it looks like, there's a piece of paper with a lot of clauses and heretofores and whereases and subsections. And you're telling me it's a little more complex than that, almost hard to read as it is document, with some good intent. I mean, people worked on this with some good intent. I think a lot of people probably were not at the table who probably should have been at the table. And, despite, between you and I, despite the fact that they have some constitutional conventions, I think that generally our communities are not that informed of their rights.
Right.
And their rights are not all held in the Constitution from an IRA government, right? I mean, the Creator gives us rights that are separate. And as a Anishinaabe person, I'm pretty much good on that one, right? But at the same time, there's a bundle of rights contained within the regulatory, judicial, legislative, executive offices of our tribal governments that are in this Constitution. Now, what you just told me, something I don't know, which is a lot of stuff you tell me I don't know, is that until 1972,
right,
if I was a white or tribal member who was happily living over on Fond du Lac, I could run for office on Fond du Lac.
And hold it.
Yep. But in 72, I, despite being nice Ojibwe person living over there, maybe considering that my community my whole life, could not actually run because I was on the wrong res.
Right. What I've been told, because I was too young to even vote in 72, as I believe you were.
That is right. I was too young. We're about the same age.
Right. And so what happens is, what I was told was they had the two questions on the referendum, and then they had like one box for answers, yes or no. And so while people were enthusiastic about changing the voting age from 21 to 18, like they did in the United States during the Vietnam War for everybody else, they didn't really understand what it meant to say yes, and it also meant, and now you can only run for office on your reservation where you're enrolled if you live there, and or vote for, people running for the reservation where you're enrolled. And so effectively at Leech Lake, that meant every white earther over there no longer had any right to representation.
And there are a lot of white tribal members on
Thousands. There used to be a couple 3,000 over there. And so instantly they were disenfranchised from representation, and over time were disenfranchised from other things. And so really what happens is, when you look at the political situation, now you only have to please half the Indians on the reservation because only half can vote for you. And if you got a split situation, you only got to figure out how to please a quarter of them because half are going to vote against you. So then you figure out who that quarter is to make sure you keep yourself in office. And so then you're not even trying to satisfy or watch out for all the Indians. You're trying to watch out for that part that keeps you in office. And that happens everywhere. That's just politics.
Right. I just remember, just to show you how old I am. I remember one time with Chairman Wadena, Darryl Wadena, and highly contested. And most of you who, maybe if you were not around, you don't know this, but they all went to jail. 23 separate felony convictions each. That was an administration on White Earth, the Wadena government. But I remember going in, and he was convicted, in fact, of voter fraud, election fraud, and mail fraud. But he went in, and I remember him saying, "Well, you didn't vote for me, and so I don't have to account to you." And I said to him, "Well, how do you know I didn't vote for you?" But that whole issue is part of how politics got kind of a bad name.
Right.
And also this whole idea of that you're only accountable to a very small number of people, when you have to be the leader, or we are counting on you to be the leader for all of the people.
Right.
Not just your relatives.
Right. That's right. That's
not
right.
Not just your ones that are from your tribe there, right?
Right. Right. And so, we got all these mechanisms that you try to figure out how things work, and they just don't work out right. Because we also, the other thing that happens to us in Indian country, it happens to everybody, but we don't see it the same way in the bigger world, is we're grant driven because of our poverty. And so we only work on the things that we can get federal grant dollars for most of the time. And those federal grants aren't for the things that we think about helping ourselves. An example would be the tribal police were able to get a grant for new radar detectors. Okay, well, that increases public safety on the roadway, but that means you're probably going to be pulling over more tribal members and finding them. How is that really helping? Or should you be figuring out how to make sure that they're insured and have a driver's license? Maybe that's more important.
Which is an income thing.
That's right. But we're only addressing one side of that problem. And so we're not looking at it the way we might look at it as tribal people, because we have a collective interest at stake.
Well, and I just want to reiterate what you just said is like being grant driven. Because I think that's really true. I mean, I run a nonprofit which is poor as heck. We've been around for, good 25 years. But, the reality is that you get grants to do things and then you're like, well, that's not what we really need to do. And then what are the implications of that? I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about that and I'm just happy when I get a grant. But it's just, I mean, you get into these issues with tribal governance and it's a whole other can of worms we aren't opening now. But like, the instance, like how many cops you need, we're underserved, but at the same time, how many people should you criminalize?
Right.
Are we in the business of putting our people in jail? Do we need more jails? Do we need to own those jails? That's a whole set of social decisions that have to do with grants, because you can get more money now because of Homeland Security to have more cops and to have more advanced things and to have more of your people go to jail. But and then that's another thing is, can you vote ever if you're a felon on a tribal reservation? You can't vote still.
On the tribal elections you can, because we don't have a prohibition.
So we didn't disenfranchise those people yet.
Well, not from voting. And, ironically, and this is another one of those quirks, and this is one of those tricks, and I call them a trick because I'm always distrustful of government. There was a constitutional referendum in my lifetime that I participated in, and you did just a few years ago. I think it was like 2005, where they amended the Constitution to where if you're convicted of a felony, then you can't run for office. And that was one of the things that people like Irma and other people, even at Leech Lake, wanted to do, because when you have elections at White Earth, on-reservation vote, Chippewadina was getting the on-reservation vote. Irma was winning with off-reservation vote.
And he was a felon.
And he was a convicted felon. So what are the people telling you?
It was a political move.
Right. To ace out.
Wadena.
That's right. Now, when they did that election, and I was talking earlier about referendums where, you have a referendum, you set it up, you set out into educational material, and 30% of the people have to at least show up, to even have an election. Okay? And if you don't have 30% turnout, then your issue doesn't even go anywhere. Well, what they did was, and nobody knew, and I mean even nobody from the old guard, they had same-day voting, on-site registration. Well, what that meant was that the voting pool was whoever showed up and whoever participated.
And what was this for?
This was for convicted felons not running for office.
So that's when that was?
Right.
Okay.
And so that referendum won by like 75%. That never happens. What happened was, because it was only a 30-day window, and the number wasn't the whole number of the 40,000 Chippewa tribal members, it was who registered and voted. And so you had to register to vote, and then they sent you an absentee ballot. They found out in that 30 days there was something like 1,500 ballots that didn't even get back in the 30-day window to be counted in the election. But because you could show up and vote, and people are always against felons, it carried very smoothly and easily. But now what people have found out is that their uncles and other people have either been removed from office or can't run for office, and some of the things that people are convicted of felonies for aren't exactly what we would consider crimes.
Right. I mean, this is a larger discussion than you and
exactly.
I. A lot of these are marijuana, like a lot of them are drug convictions. A lot of them have marijuana convictions. Right?
Look at Larry Cloud Morgan. He has a federal well, he's dead, but I mean, he had
rest in peace.
Right. He had a federal conviction for going up on the fence at a nuclear power plant during a demonstration.
Right. I don't have any of those yet, but protesting could be a federal conviction, particularly if you go on a federal property, right?
And then you have to think about who does the convictions. Well, in a public law 280 state, it's the state of Minnesota. It's 87 different county attorneys, so we don't even have any control over who is being charged or not, prosecuted or not, or convicted or not. And then you got 50 states where tribal members can live. So what's the standard?
Not all felonies are equal.
Well, not only are not all felonies equal, but over at Fond du Lac, when they were trying to implement this, and they're a lot more black letter law kind of people, the first election was going on in one of the districts, and they come to find out that one of the people was alleged to have been convicted of a crime, of a felony, and they traced it down to a drug deal like you're talking about. It was like out in Connecticut or something, but because the guy had fled the state to avoid prosecution, he hadn't actually been convicted, and so they actually had to restart the election with him as a candidate because he hadn't been convicted. He only fled. And so then they found out that one of the other people who either won in the primary was actually a prior convicted felon, and they had to have 3 different primaries because of all of that stuff. And these were people that tribal members wanted to support one way or the other anyway. It's really kind of all of these things are reactive, personal kinds of things. The Constitution that we have, like it or not, the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe Constitution, if people would respect it, if they would uphold it, we wouldn't have half the problems that we do. The problem is everybody doesn't want anybody else looking in their backyard, telling them what they can or can't do, what's right, what's wrong, whether it's tribal members of their own reservation or Fond du Lacers on Leech Lake or whatever. They want to be left alone to do what they're doing.
Okay, so now let's just go back. I mean, there's a lot of ways to discuss this, but first, it's just you listening, you saying this. I mean, so I don't know what I think, but what I think is this, I think it's an interesting conversation because you're trying to fix something that is flawed. And I think that that's really important. It's like the Minnesota Chippewa tribe is not the be all end all of all things.
No.
And the White Earth tribe, or the White Earth, we are a removal. But we are descendants from, the 44 treaties, and the rights are now retained by these governments. And, but there are also certain responsibilities. Like, I'm always like to discuss the fact that we're a rights-based society, but we also need to be a responsibility-based society. Because it's our responsibility to make sure that our land is good, and our water is clean, that there are fish there, and that there's not too much mercury in them, or whatever. It's not just about, you have a right to do it. You also have a responsibility. So here we are talking in this, legal era of 2013. And we are, the White Earth tribe is trying to do something different. You got to give them some street cred for courage.
Yep. I don't argue with most of the Constitution, but I don't think you can get there from here legally. I think you have to do something above board legally with the Minnesota Chippewa tribe to kiss them goodbye, to say we're going to have enrollment the way we want to. That at a minimum, I don't see how it can happen.
Okay, say that one more time.
I don't see how White Earth can break away or do what it's doing with this new Constitution and be part of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. And you have to have a mechanism or a procedure or a process to separate from the MCT to have a standalone Constitution.
Okay, so having said that, Frank, I mean, it sounded like you're not a big supporter of the Constitution that's proposed.
I'm not, because I don't think it can be done, and I don't like the idea of 60% to try to change or amend the Constitution. I think that means whatever gets voted on is almost permanent the way it is, period, forever.
And so whatever flaws there are, there's not because I had a discussion with Terry Denise about this, the voting down Section 1B, voting for Section 1B. There's no, you take this or you don't take this.
All or nothing.
And in that, your suggestion is not only is there, not only is there problems with some of the choices that are being made, but there's also problems with what we might lose.
Right.
And you're worried. I mean, I get it. And so you're basically saying vote no, because the other reason you're saying is that there's problems with what some of the choices that would be made and how it would be carried forward. There's problems with what we might lose in terms of, overall relationship to the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, all the land, 1855, all of these things, right? And then in addition to that, you're saying once you approve that Constitution, it's almost impossible to change.
Right.
And so in your suggestion, the fact that those of us who have non-enrolled or less than a quarter White Earth Minnesota Chippewa tribe, which is my family, I got my grandchildren are all that, but blah, blah, blah. But I am not unique in this situation. All my kids are more Indian than me. I worked hard. I did the right thing. You know what I'm saying?
A selective pool.
It's a selective pool. We're really Indian over there. We're pretty resi. But, even in my best interest of trying to get my tribal children enrolled here, you're saying that might be short-sighted.
It's certainly not open-minded and broad, recognizing what you hold and have and what you might be giving up. It's a pig in a poke at best, and I don't even think it's that.
What does that mean, a pig in a poke?
I think it means you got your eyes closed, you reach into a bag, and you pull out one of the little piglets, and you get whichever one you grab. out of a gunny sack.
I was wondering what that meant, Frank.
Yeah, I think that's what it means.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're saying that's not a good way to decide the future of your nation?
No. What were there? There were something like, let me think now, were there 24 or originally 42 or something delegates? And at the election, there was 24 people that showed up, 16 of which supported the Constitution and 8 didn't. So you got 8 who didn't, which is 1/3. And then you have, what would that leave out of the 24? That would leave another 18. So 8 and 8 is 26. So you got 26 people who didn't vote for the Constitution and 24 who did. What does that mean, if anything? Nothing in this process.
Yeah, it's not sounding good, though.
No, it doesn't when you start doing the math a different way.
Right, and I wasn't that good at that kind of math, but you're right. It's like facts are not always as clear as they appear.
Right.
And in this case, but important. So November is the final days on this, and in the least, those people who are listening, people should probably get a little informed on this, because this is big stuff. And
Talk to their elders.
Talk to their elders about it, get informed. I mean, a couple other thoughts on this is that, one, you're telling me, Frank, that if you don't show up, what happens? I mean,
it's like a yes vote almost. The yeses are going to be the ones that benefit from it, because you won't be able to exercise a no vote.
Okay. So,
and there are people who want their grandchildren enrolled, if nothing else drives it.
So what you're saying is that in this case, abstaining or not participating in the constitutional vote on the White Earth Tribal Constitution is in fact a yes vote.
That's what I would say.
All right, so those who are sitting on the fence are throwing peanuts from the gallery or arrows to the back of their tribal representatives. If you oppose this, you should probably get out and vote. Is that what you're suggesting?
Right, because
you should come out and vote no if you really oppose it.
That's right. And demand more information and find out what's at stake, and if we can really break away from the MCT and have a meaningful constitution that will be recognized by the federal government, free and independent of the MCT, with no other process involved.
And then if you believe in this constitution, you go vote.
Yep.
And if you believe in change, you might vote or you might vote against it. And then that doesn't mean that we can't ever have change, but this, in your suggestion, it may not be the change we want.
If we vote no now, we're still going to find something else. If we vote yes, we're going to be stuck with what we have for whatever that means. And I can't tell you what it means because we've just talked about it, and I can tell you what I don't know.
Right. And a pig and a poke doesn't sound too good to me right now. All right, Frank Bibeau, a White Earth Tribal member living in Ball Club. And,
Center of the universe.
Center of the universe. Glad to have you on the large and interesting team of White Earth Tribals. Thank you again for NEG Radio.
Crazy stuff, huh?
Yeah, crazy stuff.